So, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse just released, and it is phenomenal. It's just as good, if not better, than its predecessor, and really has me excited for the next movie in this trilogy and how that's going to wrap up the story of this version of Miles Morales. And while a discussion about this movie is definitely worthy of its own video, I'm actually here for a different reason, to actually discuss how the first Spider-Verse movie impacted animation when it first released, and how it continues to impact that genre as a whole. Let's talk about it. So before we talk about how these movies impacted animation and the genre altogether, we need to go back a long way, because plans for an animated Spider-Man movie go back as far as 2015 when it was officially announced that Phil Lord and Chris Miller of Jump Street and the Lego Movie fame would be writing a movie for Sony, who by this point were in the aftermath of the Amazing Spider-Man 2's failure, and had to partner with Marvel to bring Peter Parker into the MCU, leaving us where we are today. In 2016, Lord and Miller completed a script for the movie, and Sony chose Bob Persichetti to direct it. Eventually, Peter Ramsey and Rodney Rothman will also join as co-directors as well. And in 2017, we got our first look at the movie.
This morning I woke up in a fortress of distortion. I'm at war with my emotions. I'm coming home now. I'm coming home. Right where I belong now. Right where I belong.
In December 2018, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse released to huge critical acclaim, and Sony, for the first time arguably since 2004, had made a fantastic Spider-Man movie. The film grossed $384.3 million at the box office and led to a huge influence on Miles Morales in comics, and his popularity exploded with his own solo video game titled Spider-Man Miles Morales in 2020. But moving on. So by 2019, Sony had announced plans for a sequel to Into the Spider-Verse, which Lord and Miller would be writing the screenplay for. The film was originally planned as a two-part movie titled Across the Spider-Verse, but the decision was made to actually make them separate movies with an overarching story, kind of like Endgame and Infinity War, and how those films were loosely connected and kind of had an overarching story. Now, Across the Spider-Verse recently released on June 2nd, and much like its predecessor, was received extremely well, and for some has also outdone the previous movie in terms of how good it is, and I can very much agree with that. The movie is amazing, spectacular, and of course, sensational. Now, the biggest part of the Spider-Verse movies in many fans' eyes is the animation. It is gorgeous to look at. With the first movie, Lord and Miller wanted the film to have its own unique style and mix traditional hand-drawn comic book techniques with modern computer animation, and it was probably one of the smartest moves I've seen in an animated film. And the first movie also featured a large team of animators consisting of 140 artists being involved on production. That's dedication! But when it came to Across the Spider-Verse, oh boy did Sony step it up in a huge way. Now, Across the Spider-Verse features a lot more variants of Spider-Man, with characters like Gwen Stacy, Miguel O'Hara, and Hobie Brown, whose character animation in this movie took the Spider-Verse animators 2 to 3 years to complete in time for the movie. Now, you remember when I said that 140 animators worked on the first movie, right? Good, because this movie had 10 times as many animators with 1,000 artists working on this movie altogether. I mean, seriously, you have to admire the dedication there, right? Plus, to my knowledge, this is one of the longest animated movies ever produced, and it's one of the most creative ones ever put to screen. The release of the first Spider-Verse movie began impacting the world in a big way. For one thing, it led to Miles Morales getting a lot more exposure in comic books, and I have a very strong feeling it led to his own spin-off game at Insomniac, but that's just kind of what I think. Now, it's not just comic and video games that we need to talk about here, because thanks to Spider-Verse, the animation genre as a whole is now becoming rejuvenated, not in terms of animated shows per se, but more in terms of animated movies. This is an example of what I like to call the Spider-Verse effect, and I have 3 main animation examples I'll be using to demonstrate my point. Now, thanks to Spider-Verse, other animation studios are taking note of what made that movie work and have started applying it to their own productions. And the first example I'm using to demonstrate my point is DreamWorks, who put out 2 very well received animated films last year, including The Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. With the former, DreamWorks began incorporating more illustrative and stylized animation aesthetics into the designs for the environment and the characters, but with the latter, is a little different. Now, because the story of Puss in Boots has its origins in fairy tales, the animation style for The Last Wish was actually designed to make the film look more like storybook illustrations, and using new technology, the animation team at DreamWorks focused more on a painterly style design to make the film look more like a fairy tale world, as opposed to previous films like the first Shrek movie not really having that style. And finally, we come to the upcoming Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie titled Mutant Mayhem.
Sarge, we're in a sewer. I'm going to talk about the turtles.
And loads of people, myself included, have noted that its animation style is very comparable to Spider-Verse, and that's because, like Spider-Man, the Turtles also have their roots in comic books. Now, the main takeaway from the animation style of this movie is that it looks to be inspired by the grittier depiction of New York as drawn by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, but I can understand why Spider-Verse's unique style can be seen as a similarity here. But in conclusion, I think that Spider-Verse's impact on animation is only just beginning, and if Across the Spider-Verse is anything to go by, then I think more animated films will look to these movies as a prime example of how animation can be done justice on the big screen. And that brings to a close another video. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all soon with a brand new video. See you soon, guys.